Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever actually wondered what happens to your old smartphone or that dead laptop or maybe a broken TV right after you throw it away? We usually just tend to think of discarded electronics like regular trash, right? Out of sight, out of mind. But the reality is that the devices we rely on every single day are filled with this hidden, incredibly dangerous payload. So today, we're breaking down the hazardous nature of e-waste. We're going to focus on what's known as the toxic trio of e-waste chemicals. We'll look specifically at the severe health risks they pose, and then we'll check out the complex professional methods required to actually handle them safely.
First off, the scale of this problem is just staggering. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that globally, only 15 to 20% of e-waste is actually recycled. Think about that for a second. That means a massive 80%, or honestly even more, of these electronics are going straight into our landfills and incinerators. And as our technology gets cheaper and obsolescence is basically planned into the devices we buy, the volume of these discarded items is literally ballooning into one of the fastest growing waste streams on the entire planet.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, the hidden e-waste danger. Second, we'll meet the toxic trio. Third, bioaccumulation and health risks. Fourth, capturing vapors with the bulb eater. And finally, neutralizing lead-acid batteries.
Section 1. The hidden e-waste danger.
Okay, so we really need to completely rethink how we view obsolete devices. Honestly, it's best to think of e-waste as a Trojan horse. On the outside, your old computer or game console looks completely sleek, completely inert, and perfectly harmless. But inside, it's packed with this complex matrix of plastics, metals, glass, and some highly toxic inorganic compounds. Now, they're safely contained while the device is just sitting there on your desk, but once that casing is crushed in a garbage truck or dumped in an open pit or illegally burned, well, that Trojan horse opens up, and those deadly invisible materials escape right into our environment.
And what's really interesting about this is the massive concentration of the problem. While e-waste might only make up a tiny percentage of total solid waste by volume, we're talking sometimes just 1 or 2%, in the United States, an estimated 70% of all heavy metals in landfills come entirely from discarded electronics. 70%! That paints a perfectly clear picture of just how incredibly toxic this specific waste stream really is compared to your everyday household trash.
Section 2. Meet the toxic trio.
All right, let's do a little autopsy on our gadgets, shall we? Our toxic trio consists of lead, mercury, and cadmium. First up, lead. It aggressively attacks the nervous system and kidneys. Then there's mercury, which causes severe brain damage and chronic vision loss. And finally, cadmium. This stuff is packed into rechargeable nickel-cadmium batteries and chip resistors. It accumulates in the liver and kidneys and is highly teratogenic, which means it can cause terrible birth defects and developmental disorders in children. These aren't exotic chemicals cooked up in a lab somewhere. They are lurking right inside the devices we use every single day.
Let's look a bit closer. Those older, bulky TV picture tubes and CRT glass monitors, they contain an average of 4 pounds of lead. 4 pounds! That is a massive amount. And it's not just the big clunky stuff either. Printed circuit boards, basically the brains of almost every electronic appliance, are absolutely covered in lead solder, which is used to connect all those tiny electrical components together.
And moving on, here is exactly where the other two members of our toxic trio hide out. Fluorescent lamps, which are often used to provide the backlighting for older LCD monitors and laptops, contain invisible, highly toxic mercury vapor. Meanwhile, if you look at a messy pile of small hazardous components, things like switches, relays, and rechargeable nickel-cadmium batteries, that is exactly where dangerous cadmium and even more mercury are heavily concentrated.
Section 3. Bioaccumulation and health risks.
So what actually happens when this toxic trio gets out? Well, when e-waste is improperly disposed of, let's say it's dumped in a leaky landfill or openly burned just to extract copper wire, these heavy metals don't just magically vanish. They seep directly into the soil and the groundwater. And through a process called bioaccumulation, these toxins are absorbed by plants, they're eaten by animals, and eventually they travel straight up the food chain to our dinner plates. The poison literally builds up over time in the fatty tissues of living organisms.
The consequences of this bioaccumulation are visceral and frankly devastating. We're talking about severe developmental disorders in young children exposed to lead, which, by the way, the US EPA actually classifies as a probable human carcinogen. We see complete central nervous system failure, severe kidney and liver damage, and chronic respiratory illnesses. And when e-waste is burned, those plastic casings release chemical dioxins that severely disrupt the human endocrine system. It's incredibly dangerous.
There is a cascading, full-body health effect to this kind of pollution. Whether you're inhaling particulate matter from open e-waste burning, or maybe drinking water contaminated by landfill runoff, the human body is just under total assault. You can actually trace a direct line from a mismanaged laptop battery sitting in a landfill right to nerve damage, cardiovascular illness, and cancer risks in the surrounding communities.
Section 4. Capturing vapors with the bulb eater.
Now, I don't want to leave you with just all doom and gloom here. Let's look at how professional waste handlers safely tackle these hazards. Cold cathode fluorescent lamps, or CCFLs, which get removed from old monitors, are incredibly fragile. If one of these snaps in half, it immediately releases that toxic mercury gas we talked about earlier directly into the air. That's exactly why the technicians handling these must wear specialized FFP3 masks, protective glasses, and full-body suits. It's a highly delicate operation.
To dispose of these safely, professionals use a frankly remarkable piece of technology known as the bulb eater. It's essentially a machine that sits on top of a large 220-liter drum. As workers feed the fragile lamps into the chute, the machine safely crushes the glass down into a superfine powder. But the real magic is in the filtration. It uses a massive HEPA dust filter combined with an activated carbon filter to actively capture and neutralize over 99.99% of the deadly mercury vapor. It can process over 1,000 lamps safely without a single drop of poison escaping into the air. It's a total game changer.
Section 5. Neutralizing lead-acid batteries. Finally, how do the pros deal with one of the heaviest and most corrosive e-waste items out there? Standard lead-acid batteries are absolutely everywhere. They're used to start our cars, they provide off-grid household electric power, and they act as the primary emergency backup for massive IT server farms and entire national telecom infrastructures. And because they contain both toxic lead and highly corrosive liquid sulfuric acid, dealing with their end-of-life disposal is a critical environmental mission. Now, there is a very strict protocol for these, but unfortunately, mishandling is incredibly common. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how not to handle these batteries. Stacking them haphazardly on top of each other, throwing them into messy piles, or letting their positive and negative poles touch, that is a recipe for absolute disaster. This kind of mishandling leads to cracked casings, which means instant toxic lead exposure and massive, dangerous pools of leaking sulfuric acid that can cause horrific tissue damage. So instead, professional recyclers follow a strict, highly scientific acid neutralization process to eliminate the threat way before the lead can even be recycled. It's a multi-step procedure. It requires intense concentration, starting with the right safety gear, moving to acid extraction, chemical neutralization, and finally, rigorous pH testing to ensure the danger has completely passed. Let's walk through it. Because of the extreme danger, technicians must wear heavy-duty protective gear. We're talking thick butyl rubber gloves, chemical-resistant aprons, safety glasses, and PM 2.5 masks. They carefully open the battery chambers and slowly pour the highly reactive sulfuric acid into a heavy-duty plastic container. One wrong move here can result in airborne acid fumes that can literally burn internal respiratory tissues. It is serious business. Once the acid is completely drained, the real chemistry experiment begins. Workers carefully add an alkali directly into the acid to force a chemical reaction. This creates heat and neutralizes the corrosiveness. But they don't just guess when it's done, right? They dip a strip of blue litmus paper right into the mix. If the paper turns red, the solution is still highly acidic and dangerous, so they have to keep adding alkali and waiting until the litmus paper proves the acid has successfully converted into completely harmless salt water. Only then can the lead safely go to the smelter. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really challenge your perspective. The next time you upgrade your phone or maybe toss out an old electronic toy, ask yourself, are you just throwing away trash or are you mismanaging a highly hazardous material? The choices we make at the end of a device's life dictate the health of our soil, our water, and ultimately our own bodies. Thank you so much for learning with us today. Make sure your e-waste always finds its way to a certified professional recycler and keep staying curious.